The slap came first. Hard enough to rattle her teeth and make her ears ring. The kind of hit that left a taste of iron in the mouth before the pain even reached the brain. Morgan Metzer didn't scream. She couldn't. Her mouth was covered with duct tape, pulled so tight across her lips that every breath scraped her throat. Her wrists were bound together, the skin already raw where the tape dug in. The room smelled of dust, cheap cologne, and fear. The man in front of her moved like he'd done this before. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't nervous. He checked his watch, looked around, then adjusted the small camera pinned to his jacket. The red light blinked once, recording. He leaned close enough for her to feel his breath on her cheek. "Don't make this harder," he said. His voice was muffled under the black ski mask, but it carried something she recognized. Not just the sound of it, something underneath. A rhythm, a tone. The way he stretched certain words, like he was talking to someone he knew. Her pulse kicked against the tape. He stepped back, looked around the small living room again, then slipped out through the back door. She heard the door shut, heard his footsteps fade, and for a moment there was nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and her heartbeat crashing in her ears. Then came the sound of tires on gravel. Morgan. The voice made her chest seize. It was him again, but not the voice behind the mask. It was the other one, the one she had loved once. The one she had left. Rodney Metzer burst through the front door like a movie hero, breathless, panicked, calling her name. "Morgan! Oh my God, Morgan!" He ran to her, dropping to his knees beside the chair where she sat bound. "Baby, it's me. It's me." She shook her head, tears streaking down her cheeks, trying to speak through the tape. He ripped it off in one motion. The skin tore, she gasped in pain. "Who did this to you?" he demanded, glancing wildly around the room as if expecting someone to jump out from the shadows. "Did you see his face?" She tried to speak, but the words came out as broken sounds. He. Shoo. Rodney pressed a trembling hand against her cheek, his thumb brushing the mark where he'd hit her minutes earlier. "It's okay. You're safe now. I called the cops. They're coming." Blue and red lights filled the house 10 minutes later. Officers flooded in, securing the scene, whispering to each other as they took photos of the overturned lamp, the broken glass, the blood on the floor. Paramedics lifted Morgan onto a stretcher, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Rodney stayed close, holding her hand, his eyes darting between her face and the officers. To everyone watching, he looked like a man who'd risked everything to save the woman he loved. But every scene was part of a story he'd already written. The police thanked him for acting quickly. The local paper called him a hero. The next morning, the news anchor smiled as she read the headline, "Local man saves estranged wife from home invasion." For a few days, the whole town believed it. People dropped by his house with food, with prayers, with admiration. They said things like, "You did the right thing, and she's lucky you showed up when you did." Rodney nodded modestly, playing the part. "Anyone would have done the same," he said. But when the cameras left and the house went quiet, he sat alone at the kitchen table staring at the duct tape still lying there from the night before. He hadn't thrown it away. Some part of him couldn't. He touched the edge of it, ran his thumb along the silver surface, and whispered, "She'll understand." Across town, Detective James Tanner was going through the case file again. Something about it didn't sit right. He'd seen real break-ins before. The chaos, the panic, but this scene looked staged. Too clean. Too deliberate. He flipped through photos of the duct tape, the broken lamp, the scattered papers. Each item looked like it had been placed, not dropped. And the window glass? It was shattered outward, not inward. Whoever broke it had done so from inside the house. Tanner rubbed the bridge of his nose and sighed. "This guy's good," he muttered. The next morning he went to the hospital to check on Morgan. She was sitting up in bed, eyes distant. When Tanner asked if she'd seen the attacker's face, she shook her head. He wore a mask. But, she hesitated. His voice sounded familiar. "How familiar?" Tanner asked. "Like someone I used to know." Tanner nodded slowly. "Your husband." Her mouth tightened. "Ex-husband." She looked out the window, watching a nurse push a cart down the hall. "He always said the same thing when he got angry. Don't make this harder." The man last night said it too. When Tanner left the hospital, he wasn't sure whether to believe her. But by the time he got back to the precinct, he did. Traffic cameras near Morgan Street showed a silver Ford SUV idling half a block away at 3:45 a.m., 15 minutes before Rodney called 911. The timestamp didn't lie. Neither did the GPS ping from his phone. He'd been there the whole time. Tanner leaned back in his chair, staring at the frozen frame of the SUV on his monitor. Our hero, he said softly, was already on the scene. 2 days later, he called Rodney back for a follow-up interview. Rodney came dressed in a neat polo shirt and jeans, hair freshly cut, cologne strong enough to fill the room. He smiled politely when Tanner shook his hand. "I'll do whatever you need, detective." "Appreciate it," Tanner said, setting down a recorder. "We just want to clear up a few details. You said you were asleep until you realized something was wrong." Rodney nodded. "That's right. Something woke me up. I can't explain it. A feeling. And you drove straight to her house?" "Yes." "What time?" "Maybe around 4. Tanner slid a photo across the table. "This is a traffic camera from 346. Looks like your SUV." Rodney blinked. "That can't be right. Maybe the time's off." "It's synced with the city server," Tanner said. "Pretty accurate." Rodney swallowed. I might have gone out a little earlier. I couldn't sleep." Tanner's voice stayed calm. "We also found duct tape and zip ties in your garage. Same brand and lot number as what we collected at the scene." Rodney stared at him, eyes wide. "You can't seriously think We're just covering all bases," Tanner interrupted gently. "You know how it is." Rodney forced a laugh. "Sure. Of course." He left the station 10 minutes later, his smile frozen but his hands shaking so hard he dropped his car keys twice before getting into the driver's seat. That night, he barely slept. Every sound in the house made him flinch. The knock of the fridge door. The hum of the heater. He kept seeing her face, bound and terrified, the way she'd looked at him when he tore the tape away. It wasn't supposed to go wrong. She was supposed to see him as a savior, not a monster. She was supposed to run into his arms, cry against his chest, and realize she still needed him. The fantasy had felt perfect in his head. But fantasies never survive contact with reality. A week later, police returned with a warrant. They found the black ski mask hidden in a toolbox, gloves in the closet, and the small body camera tucked inside a shoebox under his bed. The red light blinked when they turned it on. It still held the recording. When Tanner pressed play, the room filled with the sound of her muffled sobs, the rip of duct tape, and his voice saying, "Don't make this harder." Rodney didn't deny it when they arrested him. He just kept repeating, "I didn't mean to hurt her. I was trying to help her remember." The trial that followed drew reporters from across the country. Every detail of the fake rescue became public. The purchases, the plan, the performance. The same news outlets that had called him brave now called him dangerous. Morgan sat through every day of the trial, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. She listened to the recordings, the testimonies, the lies unraveling one by one. When she finally took the stand, she looked directly at him and said, "He didn't save me. He just wanted to remind me that he still could." The courtroom went silent. The jury returned a guilty verdict on every charge: kidnapping, assault, false imprisonment, and stalking. The judge sentenced him to 25 years. When the guards led him away, he turned his head slightly, maybe expecting her to look back. She didn't. Months passed. The town moved on, but the story didn't die. It appeared in podcasts, documentaries, news specials. The hero who faked his own rescue. Morgan ignored them all. She focused on breathing again, on walking outside without checking over her shoulder. Some nights she still woke in the dark, her heart racing, her ears filled with the sound of duct tape tearing. But she'd remind herself where she was, whisper out loud, "He can't touch me." In time, the nightmares came less often. She started volunteering at a shelter for women leaving abusive homes. She never mentioned her own story, but they saw the quiet strength in her and trusted her anyway. Once, a young woman asked how she'd known it was time to leave. Morgan thought for a long time before answering. "When I realized love shouldn't make me afraid." Years later, during an interview for a film about domestic violence survivors, the reporter asked if she believed Rodney ever truly loved her. She smiled faintly. Maybe he did. But love without respect turns into something else. Something that wants to own you. The camera light blinked red. She didn't flinch at it. When the interview aired, thousands of people reached out to her online, thanking her for sharing her story. She didn't reply to most of them. She didn't need to. Knowing that someone else had found the courage to leave was enough. In prison, Rodney watched the documentary on a small TV in the common room. He stared at her face on the screen, calm, distant, untouchable. The other inmates murmured as her story played, some shaking their heads. One of them laughed softly. "Man thought he was a hero," the inmate said. "Ain't no heroes in cages." Rodney didn't answer. He just kept staring at the woman who had stopped being his long before he realized it. Outside, the world kept moving. Morgan went back to school, started working at a legal aid center, helping others navigate the system that had once failed her. She never mentioned him again, but every time she stood beside another survivor in court, she felt the balance shift a little closer to right. She wasn't anyone's victim anymore. She was proof that freedom doesn't always come from running. It comes from standing your ground when fear tells you to disappear. And somewhere behind concrete walls and steel doors, the man who once thought he could script her life finally understood that the story had never been his to tell. The news died down after a while, but the echoes of what happened never really went away. In a small town like theirs, people forget fast, but not completely. Some still whispered when Morgan passed by the grocery store or picked up coffee before work. Some pitied her. Some didn't believe her. And some just didn't know what to say. She learned to keep her head up, to walk like none of it touched her, even when the looks lingered. She'd left her old house, sold everything that reminded her of him, and rented a quiet place near the edge of town. The kind of house where the nights were still, and the air smelled like pine. The first few months were hard. The silence hit different after what she'd lived through. Every creak of the floorboards made her chest tighten. Every knock at the door froze her in place. It took time, too much time, before silence started to sound like peace again. She started working part-time at a non-profit legal center that helped victims of domestic violence. At first, it was just filing paperwork and answering phones. But slowly, she began meeting people. Women who showed up bruised and scared, clutching bags of clothes, whispering about men who promised they'd never do it again. Morgan didn't tell them her story, not fully, but they could see something in her eyes that made them trust her. She had been there. She had survived. Sometimes after work, she'd drive past the old courthouse, the one where Rodney had been sentenced. She didn't stop, but she'd slow down just long enough to see the flags waving outside, the same place where his lies had come apart. It didn't bring her joy or satisfaction. Just quiet. Justice wasn't supposed to feel good. It was supposed to feel balanced. Rodney, meanwhile, had become a ghost behind concrete. Prison stripped everything away. The lies, the charm, the audience. Inside, nobody cared about his story. Nobody believed his excuses. He tried to keep the same composure he'd shown in court, but it didn't last. The first time someone recognized him from TV, the nickname Hero Boy stuck. It wasn't respect. It was mockery. He spent most days in silence, keeping his head down, replaying every scene in his mind. The plan, the mask, the fake rescue. Over and over. He used to tell himself he did it out of love, that he only wanted her back. But when the lights went out and the cell block fell quiet, the truth always found him. He hadn't done it for love. He'd done it for control. 2 years into his sentence, a journalist from a true crime podcast requested an interview. She wanted to hear his side, the human angle behind the story. For weeks, he thought about it. Maybe he could finally make people understand him. Maybe he could tell it the right way this time. When she arrived, young and eager, he smiled like the man he used to be. "You've heard what they said about me," he began. "But you haven't heard what really happened." For 3 hours, he talked about growing up poor, about his failed marriage, about the night everything went wrong. He painted himself as broken, misunderstood. When the podcast aired a month later, the comments section burned with outrage. People saw through him. Every word he spoke sounded like manipulation wrapped in self-pity. Morgan didn't listen to it. Friends told her not to, and she didn't need to. She knew his voice too well. Instead, she kept working, kept helping others rebuild. She enrolled in night classes for counseling and earned a certification in trauma recovery. It gave her a sense of direction again, a purpose that had nothing to do with her past and everything to do with helping others out of theirs. One evening after work, she got a letter. The return address made her stomach twist. The State Correctional Facility. She almost threw it away. But curiosity won. She opened it. It was from Rodney. The handwriting was uneven, shaky. "Morgan, I know you hate me. You have every right to. I just want you to know I think about that night every day. I wanted to be your hero again. I thought if I could save you, you'd forgive me. But I see now that I was the danger all along. They tell me I'll be up for review in 10 years. If I make it that far, I'll stay quiet. I won't come near you. I promise. You were always better than me. Eh. She read it twice, then folded it and slid it into the bottom drawer of her desk. She didn't reply. Some things didn't need answers. Years passed. The nonprofit grew, and Morgan became its director. She worked long hours, spent weekends mentoring young advocates, and spoke at events about recovery and resilience. People began to recognize her, not as the woman who survived a nightmare, but as someone who built something out of it. One afternoon, she was invited to speak at a statewide conference on criminal reform. It was the first time she had ever stood behind a podium in front of so many people. She wore a navy suit, her hair tied neatly, her voice calm but firm. When we talk about justice, she said, we often think it ends in a courtroom. But justice isn't a moment, it's a process. It's what we do after the verdict. It's how we choose to heal. Her speech ended in a standing ovation. Reporters asked for interviews, but she slipped out quietly afterward. She didn't want to be famous. She just wanted to make sure no one else went through what she had. In prison, Rodney saw her face on TV again, this time in a news segment about her work. She looked older, stronger. The bruises were long gone, but the eyes were the same. Steady, sharp, impossible to fool. He turned off the television and sat in the dark, staring at the wall. That night, he wrote another letter. It was shorter this time. You won, Morgan. You got out. You built something good. I'm glad you did. Maybe that's how I pay for what I did. By knowing you're free. He didn't sign it. He didn't send it. When he died 5 years later, from a stroke in his sleep, no one claimed his body. The prison cremated him and stored the ashes for a while before scattering them in the unmarked field behind the facility. No hedlaon. No ceremony. Just silence. Morgan never knew. And maybe that was for the best. By then she had moved again. New town, new house, different life. She had friends now, people who laughed with her without tiptoeing around her past. She had found love again too, though it took her years to trust it. The man she met was gentle, patient, nothing like the one before. He didn't try to save her. He just stood beside her. Sometimes, when the night was quiet and the air still, she thought back to that morning. The duct tape, the cold fear, the sound of her own heartbeat under the mask. And then she'd remind herself. That was another lifetime. Another version of her. Now, when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see a victim or even a survivor. She saw a woman who had taken back every part of her story. And somewhere out there, in a world still full of people like him, someone else was watching her interview, hearing her words, and realizing for the first time that they too could leave. That they didn't have to wait to be rescued. That saving yourself was the bravest thing you could ever do. 10 years later, the town that once whispered her name in pity now spoke it with respect. Morgan's organization had grown far beyond its small office. It now occupied 2 floors of a restored courthouse building. Ironically, the same one where her trial had once unfolded. The words "The Haven Foundation for Victims of Abuse and Wrongful Prosecution" glimmered in brass on the front wall. Every day, people walked through its glass doors seeking safety, and Morgan greeted them with the same soft tone she wished someone had offered her back then. Her office was filled with framed letters, some typed, some handwritten, some smudged with tears. Survivors from across the country had written to her. Some said thank you. Some said they were finally free. Some said they were still trying. She kept every one. The world had changed, at least a little. Laws were tougher now on coercive control and stalking. Police departments were required to review use of force complaints with civilian oversight boards. She had testified before the state legislature twice, her calm, unshakable voice cutting through politics like glass. But none of it came easy. There were threats sometimes, anonymous letters, hateful emails from people who said she had ruined men's lives or exaggerated the dangers of bad relationships. She didn't respond to those either. The people who needed her words already knew how real it was. Morgan still didn't talk about Rodney by name. When journalists asked about her famous case, she'd smile politely and redirect. "This isn't about what happened to me," she'd say. "It's about what happens to too many people who never get their chance to be heard." She'd learned to use her pain like a tool, not a wound. It had taken years of therapy, nights of panic attacks, and countless small steps to get there. She could walk past men who looked like him without freezing now. She could drive at night without checking the rearview mirror every 10 seconds. Her new partner, Daniel, had never pushed her to move faster than she could. He had a quiet strength, the kind that made her feel safe without ever needing to say it. They'd met at a charity event, both volunteering at a food drive. He had noticed her only because of how calmly she diffused a small argument between two volunteers. "You've got a courtroom voice," he'd said that day with a grin. She had smiled back. Something like that. Their first year together had been slow. He never touched her without asking, never raised his voice. When she told him she didn't believe in forever anymore, he said he wasn't asking for it, just tomorrow. Somehow tomorrow kept coming. One spring afternoon, Morgan sat in her office reviewing a new proposal for a rural outreach program. Outside, rain drummed softly against the window. Her assistant knocked and stepped in, holding a worn envelope. This came in the mail. No return address. Morgan hesitated for a moment before taking it. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small, creased photograph. The note was short. "He's gone. Thought you should know." The photo was of a simple concrete wall marked only with a small number. No name, no date. She knew immediately what it meant. Rodney's grave. She sat back, staring at the picture for a long time. There was no satisfaction, no relief. Just a strange quiet that spread through her chest. The man who had haunted her nightmares, who had once believed he could script her life, was finally gone. She placed the photograph in a drawer with the old letter he had sent years ago. For the first time, she locked it. That night, when Daniel came home, she was sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the sky turn violet. He sat beside her without asking questions. After a while, she said softly, "He's gone." Daniel didn't ask who. He just reached over and took her hand. They sat like that until the stars came out. In the years that followed, the Haven became one of the most recognized advocacy programs in the country. Morgan traveled to schools, courthouses, and even police academies, teaching about the cycle of manipulation and control. She didn't talk about violence in numbers or theories. She talked about the silence that kills before the first hit ever lands. Everywhere she went, people came up to her after her talks. Some hugged her. Some just cried. One woman in her 40s pressed a shaking hand into Morgan's and said, "You saved my daughter." She watched her interview and left before it got bad. That night, back in her hotel room, Morgan cried for the first time in years. Not from sadness, but because she finally understood something. What she'd gone through had meaning beyond survival. It had become light for someone else lost in the same darkness. Years blurred into decades. Morgan turned 57, then 60. Her hair silvered, her eyes softened, but her presence never lost that steady power. When she spoke, people still listened. On her 60th birthday, her team surprised her with a plaque dedicating a new wing of the Haven in her name. The inscription read, "For the woman who turned pain into purpose." She laughed through tears and hugged each of them. "I didn't do this alone," she said. "None of us ever do." When the party ended and the building emptied, she walked through the quiet halls one more time. She stopped at the wall covered in photographs of survivors. Faces of people who had come through their doors and found a way to start again. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace that didn't come with the weight of memory. She left the building and stood outside, breathing in the cool night air. Somewhere behind her, a faint hum of traffic mixed with the sound of laughter from a nearby cafe. The world kept moving, messy and alive. And she was part of it. As she looked up at the sky, she thought about the girl she once was. The one sitting in a chair with duct tape on her wrists, praying someone would come. She wished she could reach back in time and tell that girl, "You'll save yourself one day." And she had. When she drove home that night, she didn't look in the rearview mirror once. At home, she found Daniel asleep on the couch, an open book resting on his chest. She smiled, pulled the blanket over him, and turned off the lamp. The house was silent, warm, safe. Before heading to bed, she stood by the window, her reflection blending with the night outside. For the first time in her life, she didn't see fear or survival or even strength. She saw peace. And somewhere in that peace, a quiet truth settled deep inside her. The past doesn't define who you are. What you build after it does.